Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's History After Dark. So tonight, Catherine is leading. She has some myths about the Battle of Towton she wants to tackle head on.
Yes.
So it's going to be, I don't know, blood, guts, gore, all sorts of things.
A bit.
I'm looking forward to it.
It
A
was
bit.
a fun time. Let's be honest. It wasn't somewhere you go on your holidays.
True.
Not that you got holidays in those days. Before we talk about all the really disgusting stuff, just in case you find it marginally offensive, Cat. Speaking of things that are marginally offensive, Cat.
Look, thank you. Although if you're prone to get marginally offended, you're in the wrong place
now. Leave.
Yeah.
This is not for you. This is not for you. And of course, technically, they did have holidays because they had holy days.
Holy days.
Which is the origin of the expression.
Thumbs up shit that
Wait.
Right, here we go. Catherine, there we go. She's done it. She's done it for the disclaimer. Hello, friends. This is History After Dark. Catherine's already sworn, which is illegal before the disclaimer. She's broken the law of History After Dark. There are other laws. We'll get to those in a minute. We call it History After Dark for a few reasons. Chief amongst them is we wanted to make somewhere where we could swear because we enjoy it. It's a hobby of ours. You know, you might go like football. We enjoy four-letter expletives, innuendo, and general filth. People are different, okay? So if you're in an open plan office with a judgmental boss, put a headphone in. If you are in an aeroplane cockpit, a submarine, or a dinghy with a small child, we call this child Timmy because Timmy is a what? He's a problem. Timmy's the sort of child that hears one depraved thing one time, takes it away with him in his mind palace, takes it to school, repeats it in front of his teacher, who in my head is Miss Honey from Matilda. She, of course, God love her, does not watch History After Dark. So she makes the first mistake and breaks the first rule of History After Dark, which is if you don't know what it means, don't Google it. It's not for you. So she Googles it, and now she's in the corner, crying, fetal position, non-verbal. Not ideal for a primary school teacher. You're up the school. They're calling the counsellor to try and figure out why Timmy knows this thing, to escalate the matter. You're also on the hook for however many weeks of therapy it's going to take to get her upright and verbal again. No one wants that. Put a headphone in. With all that being said, it should be abundantly clear what this might be like. So if at any point anybody should come moseying into our comment section, either here or on our other social media, and say something like, "Oh, I do enjoy History After Dark, but I wish the ladies wouldn't swear so much. I find it very rude." First of all, why do you want me dead? Because I swear to let off stress and tension. Why do you want me to have an embolism? You are basically asking me not to swear. It's basically killing me. Think about that. Make better choices.
What's wrong with you?
Also, on the flip side, it's not that you don't want me dead. What you want us to do is you want us to pin that comment so people will come in and humiliate you in a public fashion because that's your kink. Now, look, I won't kink shame you. They might. But what I am going to shame is kink without consent. Because I know that you know about my mate Tiffany in that Brighton basement. And
she's too busy now. You're going to have to recommend someone else. I bet she's fully booked.
Tiffany may have some sublets in other basement apartments in the surrounding area. Tiffany may be, as well as being her own dom, she is also part pimp. We love that for her. It's a business, right? She's got white clean walls across the city. She's got white clean outfits to wear and to rent. It's great. She also has an arse gnome with a fishing rod that could have your name and anus on it if you paid your money and you take your choice. But that is kink with consent. My God, I really hope everybody here is an adult. Because you can do what
that was your initiation ceremony.
Yeah, otherwise,
welcome to adulthood.
Otherwise, this is what it's like, kids. Buckle up. I hope you're all grown-ups. Either way, we are never going to say this is a drinking game, but you are grown-ups, please, so you can do what you want. This will never be medical nor legal advice. Do not sue. This is History After Dark. Tell me all about Towton.
Towton is fabulous. Right, I'm doing this as a bit of a plug as well, because some of you may know that I work with the Battlefields Trust, and I'm going to say this now, and if I remember, because I have a poor short-term memory, I'll say it at the end, but I'm saying this now because some of you might have something wrong with you and not watch the whole thing. I don't understand that, but anyway, so please come and have a look at battlefieldstrust.com. We are only quite a small charity. It's very, very little money to join. You get 4 magazines a year, one of which is a special. You get Zoom talks several times a year, which I organise, so they're going to be fabulous. And you also get access to the hub. You get walks on battlefields. You get all sorts of things. So please consider coming down and joining the Battlefields Trust. So I'm kind of throwing that in there as a little bit of a shameless plug. Some of this has got some serious geekdom in it, just as a heads up, because it's a little bit niche, isn't it? But Wars of the Roses is my favourite period in history. So I felt that this was quite, you know, there's a myth that abounds, really. I say it's a myth. I think it's just because there's one main one and there's a couple of other bits, but this is because we don't actually know the reality of what I'm talking about, but it's so, the story that's given is so improbable in a number of ways that you have to look at it and say, could this viably be the case? But it's like so many things, it's spectacular. It's gone down as this was a battle that needed to be really marked because it was exceptionally significant at the time. So you wonder a little bit how much of these figures are inflated for all sorts of reasons. But we want to talk about shocking numbers of people at this battle. We want to talk about enormous casualties because it marks it out as something really, really significant. And it was the point at which people who perhaps hadn't considered Edward IV as king before, it kind of really marked that as the point at which the Yorkists took a bit more of a step up. So it's not to say that it wasn't the biggest, bloodiest, longest battle on British soil. I don't think that's particularly disputed. It's more the fact the numbers are involved just sound like they just wouldn't be viable. So yes, the Battle of Towton was 1461. So a little bit of Wars of the Roses, but not loads because it's everywhere. So it began in terms of combat on the 22nd of May 1455 with the first Battle of St Albans, and then ended on the 15th of June 1487 at the Battle of Stoke Field. So there was 16 battles in the Wars of the Roses, which ranged from sort of slight spats with aggressive handbags to full-on shit shows of all disgusting, vile, terrifying natures incorporated within them. There were 10 Yorkist victories, 5 Lancastrian victories. Stokefield was technically a Tudor victory, but we can probably bracket that under Lancastrian. And some, as I touched upon, were more significant than others. And I think this one is firstly because it really did mark Edward's decisiveness as king, but second because it has this legend of being the longest, bloodiest, and most fatal battle on English soil ever. So where did we get to this point with Towton being so important? So it was a critical battle in this period of civil war. And remember as well, you know, it was over all these years. 16 battles is a lot, but actually there were protracted periods of peace in this. So it is important to remember that. We have this image of, oh, it's Wednesday, off we go again. But actually, the battles and the periods of warfare, whilst tensions were high a lot of the time, it wasn't something like the English civil wars, which were just fucking horrible and consistent, and everybody turned against each other and buildings were torn down. And you know, that was, no civil war's great obviously, but in terms of consistent horrificness, that one pissed all over the Wars of the Roses. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, it wasn't this consistent period of instant death here, there and everywhere on an almost daily basis. So 2nd of February, no, hang on, I've gone a little bit too far. On the 10th of July 1460, we saw the Battle of Northampton. And that was a Yorkist victory. And the king at the time, Henry VI, was captured. And so in October of the same year, he signed something called the Act of Settlement. So what this meant was that he would continue to be king until his natural death. Now, his natural death turned out in the end to be dying of melancholy, which the main symptom is evidence of a blunt force trauma to the back of the head, which have guessed, but there we go. But when he died, Richard of York would in fact become king. And if Richard was already, if he predeceased Henry, then his heirs would become kings. So what this meant was that Henry's son with Margaret of Anjou, Edward, was no longer in line to the throne. He was basically disinherited. Margaret, of course, as you would be, is absolutely livid about this, fair, and is having none of it. So the Lancastrians kind of go, right, we need to take action against this. On the Lancastrian forces on the 30th of December went to the Battle of Wakefield, which was a Lancastrian victory, and it's quite a famous one because this is where we see Richard, Duke of York, and his second son Edmund killed. And this meant his eldest son, Edward of March, was now heir to the throne, which of course means that doing anything to him could be considered as a treasonous act. So on the 2nd of February 1461, we see a Yorkist victory led by Edward at Mortimer's Cross. And then on the 17th of February, so just a couple of weeks later, we have the second Battle of St. Albans, which saw a Yorkist defeat. And critically, this is when Henry VI is released from capture, because him and his family had sort of, it was Margaret and Edward were still around, but with the king incarcerated, they are very, they're really struggling to hold power and be safe. So the problem with this now is, of course, is that we kind of got two kings. We've got Edward IV sort of at this point, and we've got the actual king, if you like, Henry VI. We all know that in the 15th century, usurpation was extremely popular. Contentious but true. And so the only way, if you've got two kings, what's the only way we can sort this out? Battle. There are no other options. It has to be a massive battle, or it's just not worth doing, basically. And the battle in question turns out to be Towton. Towton itself is about 12 miles southwest of the city of York, if that helps you to pinpoint it. I know where it is, and I still don't know where it is because my geography is that bad.
Up north.
Yeah, north of me, so north. Dragon territory, obviously. Yeah, bad times. So one of the first things we hear about Towton is that the weather conditions were terrible because people try to avoid combat in the winter for obvious reasons. Of course, it doesn't always work out like that, but it does make for a more difficult strategy in some ways. And apparently the weather was horrific. Obviously it was cold, but the wind was blowing a gale, there was snow, there was sleet. It was impeding people's progress and their vision. So if you have ever watched Philippa Gregory's The White Queen, I've never read the books, but there is a scene in that when they're going off for this battle, and Elizabeth Woodville and her mother are performing magic. They're kind of blowing spells out the window. She's holding one of her probably small daughters, and the idea being that they were put forward as witches, both in the books, but also at the time they were witches, and they were casting spells to help use the weather to help Edward and his troops win the battle. You can decide if you think that's a myth. I will leave that with you. So the thing that marks Towton out, as I mentioned, is the number of soldiers involved and then the number of casualties. Obviously, the more soldiers involved, potentially there's going to be more casualties. It's likely, especially in this period, that the numbers involved in battles were overinflated because everyone's trying to be Billy Big Bollocks, aren't they? Well, I had 20,000 men. Well, I had 30. Well, people like me more than you, and that's why I had more, and all this type of thing. So it's probably more likely than not that numbers were overestimated. And that also depends on all the usual things you have to consider when you're studying history. Who's writing it? Who for? When? Are they contemporary? what source, or later on, what sources are they taking it from? So there's a plethora of reasons why we always have to take pretty much everything with a pinch of salt. And this is absolutely no exception whatsoever, really. And sometimes it might just be, let's make it look more fancy. Let's make it an even better story by saying there were 6 billion people and it was also horrific. So that's very possibly a layer, as I think I said earlier with Towton, is to make it look like this big thing. And it was, obviously. But there also had to be an element of guesswork, because no one's there counting everyone in with a little clicker like a club on the Friday night. You know, no one actually.
Someone's going around with a clipboard and a tally.
Yeah. So, where's Jones? Where is he? He's not shown up again.
Register. Yeah.
Someone court-martial that man. But even if, I just want to make it clear, obviously, that even if we're talking about numbers that are lower than what is kind of like the official position, this doesn't make it any less awful. You know, what happened to those people is still what happened to them, whether there was 1 million of them or 3 of them. It's still unnecessary and horrific. So there was a battlefield historian called A.A. Gill who wrote, by all contemporary accounts, allowing for medieval exaggeration, on this one Sunday between 20 and 30,000 men died. That's a more grievous massacre of British men than on the first day of the Somme. Without machine guns or shells, young blokes hacked, bludgeoned and trampled, suffocated and drowned. An astonishing 1% of the English population died in this field. Now, obviously, 1% seems like an insignificant percentage, but that's a lot of people. And that's a big impact on the country, because as well, they say 1% of the population, but that's not 1% of working men. It's a bigger percentage, and I'll come back to this, of men who aren't going back to work on the fields and support their families. And, you know, all
so it's a bigger proportion of the working population.
Yes, yeah. So contemporary sources generally said, as I think it's 100,000 men in total, 60,000 Yorkists, 60,000 Lancastrians, 40,000 Yorkists, and 28, I don't have a breakdown of how much of each of these in total were massacred. I don't know how many more may have been wounded or anything like that, because obviously you're going to get people, I don't know if that includes people who died later or anything like that. So yeah, later studies do say these figures were massively overinflated, indicating quite often it was only half of those sorts of numbers. Now, this has been done. It is very useful here, if we can get the information, to compare contemporary accounts with administrative got there at the end, documents. We don't have those for this battle, unfortunately, but that can be a really good indicator, obviously, of being able to say, well, here's what they were, how do we know? And we can estimate or state a lot better. But one of the things that has been done is that people have looked at the nobles who were in attendance and what sort of retinues that they were likely to bring with them. Now, we know what Lancastrians were there pretty much, because they all were attended afterwards. There was a list of them, so we can get a rough idea. And obviously, that with it being the Yorkist victory, I'm sure there was accounts of all the brave cut down, and then all the brave who survived, and thank you for their efforts and everything like that. So acts of attainder were passed on the senior Lancastrians. Andrew Boardman used this to suggest about 25,000 Lancastrians probably were present. So that's different to the 40,000 we had earlier. So senior nobles bringing 2,000 to 3,000 men each, knights bringing men too, although we don't know how he reached 2,000 to 3,000 men. 1475 document that looks at the retinues provided by senior nobility during a war on France, a Battle of France on Edward IV, gave some suggestions for some of these things. So royal dukes like Richard of Gloucester and George Duke of Clarence would bring 1,100 men each. I don't know. Earls and barons 300 to 500 each, knights around 50 or less. So I can't give you any particularly more details about how that was broken down. But if that was the case, considering all factors that we've kind of touched upon here, the figure may very well have been as low as 7,000. Then you would add in people you've picked up on the way, locals, paid mercenaries, maybe up to 12. That seems too low. But these are the sorts of like figures that we're getting. It's also worth thinking about, it costs money to take every man you take on a campaign. Some men it costs more than others, and they're quite often anyway not paid, not fed properly, they're not given all the protective equipment that they need depending on who they are. But the more men you take, the more expense is considered with that, and it can be quite hard to raise the money for war, parliament, taxes, unpopularity, etc., etc. And if you're taking people who don't want to be there, they're hungry, they're tired, they don't know what they're doing, they're pissed off, who's to say they're not going to cause trouble? They're not going to start a riot, they're not going to defect if someone offers them something better, they're not just going to like annoy everyone local and cause town riots and things like that. They can easily become a liability. So is it better to take less men that are more financially efficient and less of a potential liability, basically? So and you also need to consider, so we mentioned earlier, population size. So the population size at that time was around 1.5 to 2 million people. No, sorry. And so the male fighting population was around 750,000 people. So if there were 50,000 men, as later suggest sources tend to say was probably the more realistic amount, that was 70%. Sorry, no, it really wasn't. That was 7% of the adult male working stroke fighting population. That is a loss of people in one place, even at the more accepted figures of around the 50-ish K, that was half of what sort of is put about as what happened. Additionally, the reported casualty numbers seem a little bit implausible. So if there's a shit ton of people, there's going to be a shit ton of people injured and killed, obviously. So as I mentioned at the beginning, contemporary accounts by heralds put in around 28,000 people dead. I don't know how they knew this. The Bishop of Exeter, who was a Neville, because there was millions of them, even after loads of them were killed in battle, said the bodies of the dead, obviously, covered an area 6 miles long by 2.5 miles wide. Bearing in mind the whole region discussed, and we'll come back to the size and the scale of the area later on, was 20 square miles. So how did anybody really know that it was 6 times 2.5 miles littered with bodies? Was that flat? Was that piled up? You know, that seems extraordinary. Again, we don't know, we weren't there, but that seems
so is this a story that got better with the telling then, do you think?
Probably. It was probably a pile of people that expanded, and that's what I said, you know, it's estimates, it's Chinese whispers, it's, you know, embroidering to make things seem worse and worse and worse, even though these were contemporary accounts because they were heralds. But you know, but yeah, put it on the map. I don't quite understand the thinking with this one, but some people said that because there were a larger number of nobles present at this battle, that meant there would be more casualties. I don't quite understand how that works, but who knows? But not everybody said that there was a particularly higher amount of nobles at this battle that you were. Don't forget, some of them have been killed off in previous battles, I would also argue. So Julian Humphreys, who you will all know, who I must thank for, he suggested, when I asked, we talked about it, he suggested this topic, and you know, quite a lot of like battlefield knowledge comes from him for me and for the Battlefields Trust as well. He said that the estimated death toll, based on the lower figures and figures that he considered quite seriously, the lower figures for various reasons, which I've only touched on here, the death toll could be around 2,400, which again does seem very low. Boardman's figures put it around 5,000, which again is much lower than have been proffered, but still quite high compared to a lot of the other battles. Quite often you're only seeing death tolls in the few hundreds, so still obviously awful, but you know, either way there's still high death tolls. So bringing all this together reminds me of one of the first real conversations I had really about this battle with the late, great and very much missed battlefield and historian about lots of things, especially real champion of Northampton's history, Mike Ingram. And we were talking about the Wars of the Roses in various capacities. And it was one of he had a number of areas that he was very strong in, and the Wars of the Roses was one of them. And we discussed this as an exaggerated claim, and it was the first time I'd really thought about it or had someone discuss it with me. I'd just heard all the things, it was terrible, and he was like, yeah, of course it was. But the thing that he pointed out to me was, say it's 100,000 men, even if they're stood all pressed together, that's going to take up a lot of space. But they're not just stood up, they're sitting down and they're lying down. How much space does that require? And it's not just 10,000 men, it's horses and carts and provisions. That's going to take up an absolute shit ton of room.
So 100,000 men, sorry, or 10,000?
100,000.
100,000.
Smaller numbers, it takes up considerable. So how much space realistically? He said that's not realistic. It can't contain that amount of people, horses, carts, and other equipment and provisions. Like
how many people go to Glastonbury? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but you see the airborne pictures of Glastonbury, and it's fields and fields and fields of people with small tents, but they'd all have had this
as we speak.
Yeah. Glastonbury Festival typically sees around 200,000 people.
Oh wow.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, well
but they have 1,500 acres of farmland.
Oh, is that a lot? I don't understand acres. I mean, it's a lot, but and is everybody there at the same time? Because you don't necessarily go for the whole of Glastonbury, do you?
I don't
know. It sounds like my idea of living hell, if I'm being quite honest. But
toilet situation very similar to Towton.
Yes, just with less pole axes. Hopefully.
But so these exaggerations then are coming from
contemporary sources.
And a need maybe to just make it sound like there was a lot of support for the Yorkists.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is it is hard to say, because I think what we're looking for here is, rather than having a definite thing, it's here's all the reasons why it seems implausible, and there's quite a few of them. But because Kat looks like she's about to impart some wisdom.
So Glastonbury, sorry. In 2023, the festival site was more than 1.5 miles in length at its widest point. It's surrounded by a super fence that is 8 kilometers long.
Oh, that's impressive though.
So I'm guessing, how big's Towton again?
Well, we'll come back to this because there's a new piece of research. Yeah, I'll come back to that, and you'll see why I'll come back to that.
Basically, 500 football pitches is Glastonbury. 500 football pitches.
I did not realise it was that huge. Huge is fucking huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
That's impressive though, isn't it?
That is impressive. That's a lot of people.
Impressive.
I think that the locals around there, when the tents are all left, are not that impressed. But swings and roundabouts.
No, I would imagine they're probably fucked off. Actually, I wonder how many people who live in that area just go on holiday.
Well, I'd be hiring out my house for a lot of money.
Yeah, they do that. Then they're like, you can pay to park on people's driveways. And
all that
like that. Yeah. But lock your stuff up, people. Lock your stuff up. So basically the point is how do you accommodate that in all this space, and obviously how do you navigate that number of people in that space as well? Even well-organized army generals, that's quite the, no one can text somebody and say, we need the rear guard to move slightly to the left. So now that obviously somebody we have to take as an authority on this is the Towton Battlefield Society. You can go and have a look at their website, and they talk about numbers of 75,000 being present, and again the 28,000 casualties. So we obviously they're a leading authority on this, so we really need to take very seriously and respectfully what they say. So one of the reasons that they have put forward as to why the numbers were so incredibly high of people that were there to start with is that by this point, the Civil War has been going on a while, there's been a number of significant battles, and it's gained a lot of traction. There have been a lot of people already killed, including a lot of senior nobles and very key figures like Somerset and Richard, Duke of York, and people like that who have been taken down. And people are coming more because they want revenge for their fallen. There's a lot more people that want revenge on other people. And also we've developed, well, not we, because we weren't there was the psychological them and us thing had started to kick in. And so this leads people to dehumanize people on the other side. So they're much more likely to want to go ploughing in and do damage to the other side. So this is one, and I think that's like a really fair way of looking at it. Actually, I think that's not beyond the realms of possibility, because if you maybe have one battle, we've got to come, there's a war, we're going to have to fight this battle, and then we're going to go away, then that's one thing. But when something's been building up for a really, really long time, it does create more of a division, doesn't it? So, and people would have been there, they argue, with real enthusiasm and real vigor and just wanting to get stuck in.
Do we know that though, or is that an assumption? Like this is
no, they're not saying it. They did say like it's just a theory that this could be one of the reasons why that if there were a lot of people there present. When you spoke about the Cheshire Bantams the other week, and people wanted to come in, they had a drive, they wanted to take part, they wanted to contribute to what they believed was, the good and the right, and defend against what they saw as something really bad. So I think they're just sort of postulating the theory that this has gained traction over a number of years, and if there were exceptionally high numbers there, and I suppose if there were other allies that had come in, like locals and mercenaries or whatever, it could be because we were starting to see this kind of like the Civil War, English Civil War and British Civil Wars. It was very much a you're right, you're wrong.
Yeah, but it's different, I think, in the fact that it's like an ideological war. They're literally like people were combined to, if they were against the monarchy, they either wanted to keep things as they were, or they wanted to overthrow the monarchy, but there was lots of factions in that so they wanted complete societal change. They wanted to reform the church, the political system, every governance, everything. The Wars of the Roses of the sort of 15th century strike me as like just deciding who is going to be on top, but the system remains the same. And I don't feel like they would be. Why are they so invested in who ends up being at the top when nothing else is changing? And also, if you think of the location of it, this isn't like a Midlands location where your Cornish and your Devon and your Somerset people and your Kent people can all like get there very easy. This is really difficult to get to, and in difficult weather, and this is hard. This is really difficult to even get there.
For it being 12 miles, it's 12 miles, but so close to York, you've got Richard of York, so the subsequent Richard III's forces and loyalties there. So it's a good location for the Yorkists in that.
But are they fighting then because we've still got the sort of feudal type system, which again we haven't got by the time you have your 17th century Civil War?
Yeah, I would have thought so if people are raising certain armies. But see, we don't know. This is just theories as to why maybe there were so many men there, because subsequent further battles we don't see this. So it's just trying to, I think, explain or look for ways as to why, if you're going to say there were so many more men here to start with, you've got all your normal reasons why people there, feudalism, people being paid hired mercenaries, whatever. But what was it? So if you're going to go
turnout,
yes, if you're going to go with the much bigger numbers than the sort of bigger than normal, but like not wow, that's much different to everywhere else thing, which could just very possibly because numbers were inflated to make it this amazing battle.
Well, that's what I'm
if you are going to go with the much bigger numbers, because people need reasons and explanations for things to make sense, you'll start thinking, well, could it have been this? Well, could it have been this? So I think it's just ideas that people have tried to look at. What if you're going with the higher numbers, why was it so much higher?
That's awkward, isn't it? Deciding to go with a theory already and then building your theories on that theory. I mean, how many bodies have been discovered there? Do we know?
I don't know, to be honest. But like at Stoke Field, they think that a lot of the bodies are buried under the battlefield. But again, I don't know. I don't know.
Is it mad with like LADAR or whatever you call it now that can come up with that someone hasn't just. Is that not of interest? If there's going to be 25,000,
we'll come back to the archaeology as well.
Right.
Again.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily answer your question, but might give a hint as to why you're saying is a really good point.
I was just wondering because I've been looking up. So the population, you could say, was between. Well, it's 2.5 million in 1400 and 3 million in 1530. So it's somewhere in between those figures. So say 2.5 million population.
About 2.5 at the time.
Which means that, so unless my maths is not brilliant, but if 75,000 men turn up, that's 3% of the population.
So there's probably 700. So the figures he gave were 750,000 men of fighting working age. So if you're going with 50,000 as the number of men there, which is kind of pitching it in the middle, that would be 7% of the male working age fighting population. So probably about 3.
Okay, do you know who I would love? I would love to. None of us, I don't think, we're going to be able to do this, but somebody who understands statistics and population.
Yeah,
because if that many people turned up and that many people died, what happened? The impact of that many men dying and not being in the pool of reproduction going forward, would I mean, I don't know, but I'd love someone to be able to
exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons, again, why it seems improbable, because of the knock-on effect. Now, I don't know. There might be writings about this that I don't know about, but you'd think, like you say, exactly, the knock-on effect of that, you think would have been recorded a bit more, would be more noticeable for,
generations.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think I said we don't know for sure how many people there, and it certainly seems like there were more than average, but it's so difficult to pinpoint, and there are so many factors, and it is more about those sorts of implausibilities, really.
So also, isn't there also an element to which, because Towton, there are, in terms of the loss of nobility in the aftermath, there's some like pretty heavy hitters in terms of nobility. And I suppose one of the things like that the Wars of the Roses does is that nobles start getting killed. And I mean, granted, like Henry V is in France becomes at a certain point it's indiscriminate who he kills, but the nobility and monarchy aren't supposed to be killed in battle. That's not, they get dysentery and shit themselves to death, but they aren't supposed. They wear the shiny and they're on the horseback.
Ransomed, don't they?
They're expensive. Yeah, you get ransomed. And I mean, if there were a reason why a bunch of like less well-off people might willingly go to Towton because the weather's bad, maybe the bad weather is appealing. Maybe more lower order individuals go in the hopes that the horses will get stuck in the mud and you can steal some rich people to ransom back to their families. Like this could make your life for your family. That's just one thing that pops into my head. But this is one of the reasons why it's weird, and these sets of battles are weird, is because the nobles start dying in numbers, and that isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, it's all a bit inconsistent. And yeah, it was of the Roses. It wasn't about things that a lot of things have been about. It was like, you know, you said it was just like, who's going to be king? There really wasn't much else to it. So
which cousin of who is going to sit on the throne?
They're not arguing
Which
about
blood-related person?
religion or like
ideology
or and it's one of those things people always say, oh well, Henry Tudor shouldn't have been king, blah blah blah. And you know, yeah, he was a usurper, yeah, his claim was very small, etc etc, all the things that we are aware of. But if the Yorkists hadn't all fucking killed each other in the first place,
well, it's also based
it wouldn't have even
the
been
whole thing's made up.
I was going to say, it's also based on an assumption that any human being who's been born within the last few decades has any right to be the human being who rules over everyone else. Exactly.
It's a bizarre system. It's a bizarre system. There you go. Oh no, let's not get into modern politics. But anyway, yeah, that's a dangerous route to go down, isn't it? Anyway. Today, the battlefield, a little bit sadly, really, is just undeveloped agricultural land. The fields were enclosed with like hedgerows and stuff in the 18th and 19th centuries, but then a lot of that's been taken away again. So in that respect, it probably looks quite similar to how it did at the time. Less dead peasants, but you know, in terms of the layout of the land. Now there's an A road and a B road that run across it, but they are not safe paths to walk unless you want to end up the same way as many of the people who were at the Battle of Towton, rather squashed and dead. And but the Towton Battlefield Society have created a walk you can follow with information boards to sort of track what was happening, so you can do that. And the Battlefields Trusts do walks around Towton, just thought I'd mention that. Yeah. Right. Now, this is something I came across the other day, and it's I found it in a battlefields group that I'm in, because that's how I roll. The Battlefields of Wakefield, so they talk about the sort of different things as well. And I would really like to find out a little bit more about this. And this is where we get into sort of much more geeky territory. So this isn't necessarily, it's not really a myth as such, but it's more about reappraisal, which obviously maybe is what the numbers need, is you know, these various reappraisals that it's gone through and perhaps will continue to go through. So there was a document posted, and I wanted to be able to show you the document, but actually the quality of it wouldn't have been that great, and we wouldn't have been able to read it anyway, so it would have been a little bit academic to put it up. But basically it's suggesting that we technically need to move away from it being called the Battle of Towton. So this is what we were going back to earlier, that was you guys were raised about the size of the area in question, where, you know, if we've looked at the archaeology, what's missing and things like that. Because in the medieval documents preceding 1417, sort of Towton's 1461, the battlefield the battle was not referred to as a standalone event. Everyone didn't just rock up on that one spot, have a big old fight, and then either die or leave. It wasn't kind of like that. So Hall, with his famous chronicle, describes the battlefield and everything that happened, and the archaeology that has been done since kind of matches up with what Hall has said. Has that been the archaeology that's done because it was just going from Hall's chronicle? So basically there may have been 3 or 4 major encounters in and around that area as part of what happened. So French documents, and again you can assess how likely you think this is true, but you could argue that because this was a civil war battle, the French didn't particularly have much skin in this game. They always have a bit, but you know what I mean. Said so initially the first part of this was the Warwick's battle, Warwick's battle was in fact defeated. His armies or his troops were defeated, and he was injured, he was wounded. And then there was a sequence from Ferrybridge to Sherborne in a place called Elmet, where there was sort of skirmishes, battle and things like that. And at that point is where Edward steps in with his forces. It's not necessarily there initially. Then there's a place called Barkston Ash, which is close to that. and another engagement followed there. And then this flowed into the fighting at Saxton, and then into what we now see as the battlefield's area. So a notable amount of the Yorkist vanguard, so the vanguard is sort of the people at the front who are leading the attacks, were actually taken out at Ferrybridge and Sherborne. And therefore, and it was likely that a major part of the fighting occurred at Sherborne and the surrounding fields. So these parts have not been subject to the archaeology of the thing we now refer to or note as the battlefield of Towton. So that's been picked to bits, but none of these areas have. So we have accounts that suggested that things happened in these surrounding areas. That may also lead and lend itself to the fact that there was a lot more space, which could accommodate extra people, possibly. I don't know. I cannot say. I do not know. I am not an expert. So therefore, we could and should consider that the battlefield or area of the battles was fought in a much wider space. And the final push at Towton was at Towton. It's what we talk about. And this was where it was a big final push in the Lancashires to defeat the Yorkists, but they weren't able to. And Edward secures this victory. So not necessarily the primary combat zone. And so maybe the driving winds and rains weren't as big a factor as we've been led to believe, but certainly it's crying out, as should have been anyway, for these other areas surrounding the noted battlefield to have that archaeology done on them. And you might find bodies and you might find all sorts of things that would indicate a lot more about what we know. So a lot of the contemporary stuff based on Hall's Chronicle, which we generally accept reasonably well as a good indication as a lot of what happened. But yeah, there's certainly a lot more out there, I think, to be discovered. And, you know, battlefields obviously honestly aren't sort of acknowledged, appreciated and protected. You know, we try to protect the battlefields at the Battlefields Trust because there's so much more than we can learn. You know, and you look at a monument to a battle like a cross or something, and if anybody touched any of those things, they would be, that's disgusting. That's a monument to the dead. A battlefield is a monument to the dead, in the same way, in fact, more so than something that has been erected subsequently or a visitor centre or something. A battlefield is a memorial, and they need to be preserved and protected and understood. So this is basically saying that the geographical area needs to be reinterpreted and re-examined, basically. And then one more last little thing is the Towton rose. I don't know if you've heard of the Towton rose. So apparently these white roses grew on the battlefield. And after the battle, because there was so much blood and everything, the bloodiest battle on English soil, which it may have been, the roses all became tinted pink from the blood. And then the saying was that if you removed the roses from there, they would not be able to grow anywhere else. Now, I'm not a horticulturalist. I think it's fair to say I can kill practically anything, but I don't think roses grow in the dead of winter. But even if it referred to this happened later on, I would imagine that by the time it was rose growing season, a lot of the blood would have been washed away. So I think that might be a porky. Anyway, so there are a number of things to contemplate about the Battle of Towton. Here endeth the lesson. Join the Battlefields Trust.
Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
I mean, yeah,
they've got me. I'm turning into a battlefields geek. They've got me.
You are. It's good.
I love it.
I like the idea of preserving battlefields. I like the idea of preserving the countryside, to be fair.
Because people just see it, like I said, as it was a field. It doesn't matter if we don't look after it. It does. I'm not saying you can't let it go a little bit wild and let nature do its course with the bees and the butterflies and the plants. No one's saying that necessarily. But
it's been farmed ever since.
Yeah, a lot of places like Bosworth. If you go to Bosworth, some of you will know this, that it's here. Yes, it's here. Let's build the visitors centre and the sundial memorial. And oh no, it's not there. That's a bit embarrassing. And
but you can see it from here.
Yeah, if you go up the top of the hill and you stand with the sundial in front of you, and you kind of go slightly to the northwest of there, it's about 2 miles on a good clear day if you've got reasonable eyesight. So you can go down to the battlefield itself, but as people said, it's farmland, so there's only certain periods of the year you can access it, because they're either harvesting or the crops are very delicate, or it is literally a fucking swamp. I know whereof I speak. So, but you can get down there if anyone's really interested. I can find out when some walks are. So, and you have to have special insurance and things like that, because you're going onto somebody else's land. But I have to say, it's some farmland. Like, if you think you're going to go and get some sort of amazing sense of wonderment, and different people as well have different sort of ideas of where the different people, the different nobles place their troops, like particularly where Stanley probably was. So, you could go with different people and get a slightly different interpretation. So Mike's book, I mentioned Mike Ingram, his book on Bosworth, he had quite a different perception. But that book's brilliant anyway. I know I was bound to say that because he was my friend. But no, it is a really well-accepted book. And then Anne Curry, again, who's a very well-respected battlefields historian, she's done a lot of work on Agincourt, and she's come up with some theories about different layouts at Agincourt, which is quite interesting. But yeah, there's all sorts of things, but you're going to go and you're going to sort of like, oh wow, we're here, this is where it happened. There's a small runway strip that you can kind of stand on, because you can stand on it because it's just grass basically, but they wanted to build around it to catch the edge with this Japanese car thing. I can't remember the details now. And although it wasn't on, it's clipping the edge, and you don't know what's there. You don't know what you're removing. And it's fine saying, well, it's a field and we can make money. Well, it's not a field. All these people saying this wouldn't knock down, as I said, a stone monument. They'd be furious. Well, if anything, that's where the people died. That's where they fought. That's where their lives were changed forever. So why?
It's very short term, isn't it? When they talk about developing land like this, it's like, because once you've done it, you've done it. There's no going back.
And quite often as well is that, I think Kat maybe has mentioned before that nowadays, when you dig up anything in London, you have like archaeologists and stuff on standby, because you're going to find all sorts of shit under there.
You have to do it everywhere.
Yes,
every time.
It's not always been. I don't know how it is now, but that's not always been as so respected. It's just like,
it's definitely
but in the past that's been missed. I mean, look at Richard III's feet are missing because the Victorians dug everything up and buggered off with it. So we don't know what we haven't got, and unfortunately, because battlefields aren't always considered important, significant, interesting enough, you don't get the funding, or it's very hard to raise the money to get the amount of archaeology interest specialists in to be able to really examine, roll out, protect everything that you need to get as much of a picture as we ever possibly could from these areas. So we really do have to preserve it, because it's only nicking the edge of it, it's only a little bit. Well, that might be the bit that could tell us the most.
No, they don't know.
So save our battlefields, save them. You can walk on the bits that have been designated that you can walk on. Don't walk on the other bits. Don't drop your litter. Don't be a bellend on a battlefield. There's a
Don't be a bellend, full stop.
Well, yes.
Words to live by.
Yes. So there we go. That was
fantastic. Thank you.
Stuff.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
If you like that, which I do. Okay.
Clearly.
What's happening this week?
We're back. We're live next week on a Tuesday.
Oh yes.
It's like a Wednesday, but it's a Tuesday. And so we are going to be joined by Dr. Michael Jones, and he wants to talk about the Black Prince and the sack of Limoges in 1370. So, and the myths around that.
We like the Black Prince. He's a good candidate for a history crush, isn't he? The Black Prince. Because he was a bit like, you know, dangerous, dark and dangerous.
I think he was named the Black Prince about 100 years, or maybe further on way after he died.
Don't spoil it.
It's only because of his armor. His armor was black.
But they weren't apparently didn't call him that at the time. So I
know, but in my
I like the idea of black armor. That's quite
yeah.
I'm not sure how they made it black. Actually, now I think about it,
it'll be all that dirt and filth we were talking about last week. Sorry, not that. Definitely not that. Right, Kat, tell us about all the other things.
Yeah, if you have enjoyed this, then please like the video and also tell your mates, and don't pretend that you don't have friends that will enjoy this, because if you've stuck through this for this many weeks, for this many years with all of us, you are dirt and filth, and we love you for it, because so are we. That's why you're here, because you're one of us, and you must have friends that are like you. Otherwise, you've kept yourself very hidden. You've gone stealth as to your true depravity. It's one of those two things. But yeah, let your mates know about it. Also, when you are subscribing to this channel, do hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button, and then select all in the drop that will appear. And then YouTube should tell you when we're uploading, when we're going live. It doesn't always. So also head over to our Substack, historyafterdarkhub.substack.com. There will be information on there. You can subscribe to that for free. You will also see links to this as a podcast on your podcast, wherever you get your podcast. I know you can't like and subscribe there, but what you can do is give a 5-star review if you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you haven't enjoyed what you've heard, don't tell anyone. It's a secret. No one else needs to. You can keep that as an inside thought. That's fine. You'll be okay. I promise. ASMR. Yeah. Okay. Also, with the Substack, that's also a place where you'll find out about our merch. We've got merch, Warboner merch, History After Dark merch, Rough Beaver merch, Roger the Beaver merch. We've also got all sorts of other things. No FIFA free on the internet. Timmy is a problem, and more is coming soon. So hold on to your butts and make sure you subscribe, because it will be first talked about on Substack. Additionally, another way you can show us that you like what we're doing is you can do that with money. Send us money.
Love tokens.
And that's the way.
Love, yeah.
Sending you love hearts for your money. Send us love and money at buymeacoffee.com/hadpodcast. You can purchase Winnebagos. You can also there join our close friends on the Instagram. If you go on Instagram and you see a little circle at the top for the stories, if the had logo has green around it, that means you're already a close friend. And it also means Catherine's found something. Probably depraved. Almost certainly. It's like, you know, when your new cat brings home like a dead bird and it's like, look, mummy, I've hunted. Catherine does that.
Myself.
Look what I've done. But it's filth. She's found you filth and dirt. And it's usually going to be historically related or beaver related, sometimes both. You're not going to want to miss that either. It's a good time. I think that's everything. Oh, also, description box, our personal social medias, where we don't use fuck like it's a comma. So if you want some light relief from our gutter mouths, we're very ladylike over there. So crack on there as well. Anything else?
I don't think so. I think that is all the things.
Yeah. Right. So join us next week for our live.
Until then, be good. If you can't be good, be careful. And if you can't be careful, for the love of everything, don't court. You're too pretty for jail. We're going in 3, 2, 1. Bye.